This next segment is going to um, go back to what Odette presented initially. If you remember that slide that started from IOPS to data ops, right, and that evolution we saw for the past 40 years with respect to requirements around file storage, right? So starting with a lot of requirements around data protection, performance, and then evolving as the market evolves to content mobility, collaboration. We have this cyber landscape happening, right, rising with ransomware attacks. And then finally, there's the knowledge age, right? Analytics, looking at the data that's under management. So it's almost like every organization is looking at storage today in a different lens, right? There are 4, 5 different dimensions by which they make choices on infrastructure, and especially file storage. And to that end, we put a lot of emphasis for the past 3 years to provide connectors, right? Provide access, augment the value that is provided by our platform by leveraging connectivity, integration to improve your security, perhaps incorporate some data analytics workflows. So just so you can get the most out of your data. So to start, we're going to start with a case study that's a great example of clients that are looking to leverage the CTERA platform as a data delivery network to facilitate a much greater goal, right? It's beyond information management and backup and DR, but it's about getting data into a single source of truth where it can then be post-processed by an application. So we're going to see a demonstration of this in a little bit, but in the Department of Agriculture's case, for example, they have imagery data that's taken by remote users, and that payload is large, right? Being media files taken from pilots or drones and things of that nature. You can imagine that the gravity of that data, shipping it over to a centralized data center, could be problematic, cumbersome, and they needed a data delivery network that will do that for them. So they are leveraging CTERA as a global file system solution to be that aggregator, to provide edge presentation with caching on top of either physical or virtual appliances to be that landing space, right, for that imagery data. Then we take action to replicate everything to the center. They have a data center that all that data gets managed with an S3 bucket. We're storing that data in its immutable form. And they're also leveraging some of the automation controls you saw before to have that kind of rinse and repeat type of playbook for deployment as new sites come on board. So the type of imagery they take is LiDAR data, right? So aerial photography, we're talking about files that could be as large as 20 gigs. And the fact that we can replicate everything at the block level and in real time and be resilient to any network interruptions was a key characteristics that they loved about our solution. But what's next for them, right? What's next is about getting all that data presented to applications or that they're building internally to process that data. Now, that could be either by accessing CTERA directly through our SMB and NFS, presented through an edge, or through our S3 protocol, or perhaps getting a replicated copy, a subset of the data exported to Azure, to Google, to Amazon, where their compute and applications are, so they can start doing that post-processing on that data. Now, you can, right, we're going to see in this demo a case study around image recognition, for example, but this is really limitless. I would say every single project we get involved in now is looking at their new NAS or distributed infrastructure in that lens. What can I deploy today that would facilitate that, forward momentum and analytics for the rest of the business?
Using something like this change notification connection, is that how this is being
This is exactly how it's being done. So the portal or the global file system is that centralized place where we can relay those notifications to any consumer. And we could do it globally, right? So all that metadata, you can tap into that and based on that trigger the start of your pipeline.
So in your example that you're showing here, where you've got effectively an on-prem filer as opposed to a public cloud service.
Yes.
Is that portal to edge device connectivity, is that handled Do I need to poke holes in firewalls, or is gRPC or something like that going to handle this?
So the connectivity from the edge to the portal is outbound on ports 995, which is our control plane and metadata. This is a protocol that we built in CTERA. And then there's port 443, HTTPS, directly to the object storage.
But that has to be manually managed at like the firewall layer on one end or the other to make that connectivity happen.
Yes, and typically it's a lot easier with respect to outgoing connections, right? So at the edge, those are typically less enforced, but inbound certainly at the data center where you have the portal deployed.
If it's a private network, you don't really care as much anyway, right?
Right.
Yeah,
If it's over the internet, yeah. But if it's not,
this case would be all these are on their own private networks, whether it's by a VPN or something else, but it's all still their private network space
Right.
or the routed space anyway.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and of course, to the question before, that connectivity from the on-prem to the cloud environment is leveraging Direct Connect, ExpressRoute, and others. Okay.
You mentioned selective S3 export. So you can decide which portions of a cloud volume to export and which portions not
Yes.
on a object or file by file basis in this case, I guess.
Yeah. So what we're going to show is we're going to do this at actually the subdirectory level. But yes, you can have an export. We're showing an architecture that you have CTERA on one hand managing your immutable copy, and then the working pool is its own subset, right? A separate copy that we feed into that.
So it's almost like you got a front end edge and a back end edge. Yeah.
Yes, I would say this though, the export though is a read-only export, right? So you cannot write data back into the global file system through that. It's a little bit more, right? I mean, it's possible, but it has to be, we have to thoroughly design that. So how do we do this, right? So going back to the architecture from before, at the very bottom, this is the engine, right? The blue engine that we call the global file system, comprised of edge devices that's presenting SMB and NFS, or endpoint clients that could be deployed on a user's laptop or server. And then on top of that, we have integrations. Those integrations are either built by CTERA, they either built by us, or we provide the connectors so you can build your own. And some of these platform connectors you saw previously in what Aron was describing. So for example, the way we work with Varonis is by shipping all the audit log data. So we have a messaging service where we can send all those audit log data information to one destination. It could be multiple destinations. Perhaps you're using one for indexing, long-term log archival, right? For any type of use. So that's how we handle audit logs. But we also have change notifications for metadata. And then, of course, there's protocols that you can access the data itself, right? So these are the three pillars: data, metadata, and audit. And what? Yes.
The data that's exported out the back, which are effectively S3 objects, they're one-to-one equivalent to a file. So you've already highlighted it.
Unpack them, decrypted.
Everything
Yes.
that's done to be able to access the data pristine in whatever its form.
Exactly. In its logical format. Yeah.
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 You mentioned decrypted.
Decrypted.
It's not clear to me that I would want to have decrypted information be floating in
So I should.
S3 repository someplace off the network.
So we can double click on that. So what I mean by decrypted, we decrypt the object. It can still reside on an S3 bucket that has encryption underlying. As you set up the S3 bucket, you can apply encryption at the bucket level. The encryption CTERA does today is at the object level.
My concern is the file is sent to the S3 bucket in unencrypted format.
Oh, it'd still be over HTTPS.
It's HTTPS. The in transit is still HTTPS, but the payload itself that gets written to the bucket, it's
Public is
its natural, yeah. It's the
format
original
would be
format.
encrypted based on what the object storage
Storage
was
encryption.
for it.
Exactly.
Well, but no, but it's like getting your stuff into Snowflake. You can't give them the encrypted data natively.
Yeah,
Right.
I understand
Now-
analytics.
Homomorphic encryption, which
but
is-
To
I
your question,
still don't like it.
the answer to your question,
Got to be clear at some point.
your question for certain workloads, we do provide the following, which is instead of using an export, is directly accessing over S3 through CTERA. So the portal, which we saw has a web application, can also natively present S3. So you can log into your account, generate access keys,
Okay.
and then that same application can read the data from CTERA, in which case only when you're performing that get object is when we're going to reconstruct the file, decrypt, and serve it to the client.
So in those cases, though, that means the portal becomes part of the data path. where
Part of the data
normally
path, whereas normally in the previous example,
Everything goes through the cache client.
yes. Yes, and you know that sometimes in analytics there are certain requirements where these are native buckets, right, provided by the cloud provider. Some tools are more sensitive to this than others, so that's why we've chosen to provide both. So in this case, right, kind of think of the opportunity, and this is what we're working on with customers is to CTERA's that content delivery network to aggregate data from a distributed set of sites to a single source of truth, and then they can easily hook in their application over S3 to do any type of post-processing. So that could be either, let's say, for example, DLP we saw in our examples. We saw predictive maintenance happening, image recognition we're going to see in this demo, and then some data science examples. So just to kind of wrap up the types of connectors, again, there are three different clusters. There's auditing and messaging, which we can forward to any number of destinations. So think Splunk, Networks, right? Datadog, right? So any syslog, RabbitMQ supported target, for example. The metadata itself is all leveraging Kafka, so you can subscribe to Kafka topics and get updates about all the changes happening across the global file system. An S3 interface, which you can just leverage your Amazon toolset for CLI to read, get, put objects from the global file system directly. The export function, and then building your own, right? You can leverage these this toolset to build your own. And we've seen some really cool stuff built by our customers. For example, indexing, content indexing workflows, where they would get a trigger based on a new file creation, proceed to read the data, and then extract all the metadata tags and put it in Elasticsearch, right? To do querying of the data, to do machine learning, and so on, right? So it's really limitless, I would say, in that regard. But I think what powers this is what we call the metadata connector. So that's the change notification capability you were describing before. That's really what sits at the heart of this, right? This would be the trigger to any start of any pipeline. So we have essentially hundreds of sites capturing these events in real time. Everything gets replicated to the portal, and portal starts publishing these JSONs, right? File created, file renamed, file updated, file deleted, path, right? That you can go and then proceed to pull the data. You can also request even the encryption key to be able to reconstruct the data yourself. And then the subscribers could be anything. Could be integrations that CTERA ends up building, which we're going to see, or it could be any third-party integration.
Well, I have a question.
Yes.
How much DDP compression is available to the file system once it's up there? Customers are always concerned about data efficiencies and stuff like that.
Can you expand?
DDP compression?
Yes.
So do you DDP compress your data up there in the cloud?
Yes.
Okay.
All
How
the
much is typical?
with reduction rates that we typically see. Reduction rates could be anywhere from, I would say the minimum we've seen was about 20% for media files. I would say average case is about 50%. We have customers with 95% as well.
Okay.
Reduction.
Depends on the data, of course.
Depends on the data, yes. And you can see that very clearly. And sometimes I would say some use cases are so, the data is unique, but the way they work is that they have their raw data, which they then copy and then they work off of that copy. So if it's media projects, if it's healthcare or things of that nature, they never alter the source. They only work off of the copy, so they benefit a lot from the deduplication. So right, in this demonstration, we're going to show image recognition based on this pipeline that we've described. So we have some images on a host. This is a MacBook. And these are aerial images, right? Taking us back to that agriculture case. So I'm a pilot. I took these photos. I'm mapping to a share on a CTERA edge device, and I'm going to proceed to copy all that data over to that share, right? So naturally, it triggers the replication to the global file system. So CTERA is going to take action, replicate everything to the S3 bucket as soon as that data is copied to the edge device. Right, so we got images, -geo satellite. We finished the copy, and all the data was replicated. We're gonna open up a browser and look at that from the web application for a second. And before we do that, we're going to export this data through S3. So the exporting to S3 does not happen unless you requested it, right? So you have a volume, the data is under management, but in order to say, I want it to be presented over S3, you can go ahead and then create what we call a bucket. A bucket is simply just create an S3 export for this data. So this is going to be an S3 presentation that corresponds to that image sat folder that we uploaded the files to.
So the export is not
Exporting, yes, so exporting leverages the S3 presentation. And what we're going to see here, I'm going to log in. Here's the image sat volume with all the files that were copied.
I'm sorry. Is the exporting
Yes.
not done when the files are actually changed, but it's done on a manual process?
No, it's done automatically. It's just the export.
When you establish an association, you do that manually, and then after that, it's all.
We just did
I
this
got
for
you.
the sake of the demonstration, just
I got
how we create this. Here we show, of course, examples of how you can allocate access keys, but let me just take it from here. You can leverage those access keys and plug them into any Amazon CLI tool to list the data, read the data, write the data. But the copy export tool leverages the same client, right? To read the data off of CTERA and then decrypt, decompress, and rehydrate, store it in the target. And what we have here is Amazon recognition, for example. We have a Lambda handler that we're going to be leveraging to test this. So this little code snippet, and then we're going to run it. So that's going to simply perform image recognition and produce tags for the file that we've just uploaded, right? So we have a little bit of outdoors, nature, sea, water, waterfront. So this is just a short example for, yes, these are the tags associated with this photo.
Yeah, so maybe I'll add, interject a bit. So how many times have you had this problem when you had data on your, let's say, NetApp filer, and you wanted to interact using a SaaS platform with this data? This is a very frequent requirement. And now, since you have a global file system, you're able to have unified access. So this really opens up the information on your NAS to essentially work with any cloud-based solution, any API as a service, any SaaS software or code that you build.
Right, it's a global file system that provides all three protocols. Right, one that's HTTP based, S3, that you can really leverage the concurrency aspect of it, and the fact that there's a big ecosystem of vendors that would provide access to leverage S3 as a data source. It is really becoming the standard. And then CIFS and SMB for low latency access and cache, right? So this is how we present data at the edge. So really providing a multi-protocol access. Two access methods, both in place or asking CTERA to export the data for you to a target location. in read-only format. And then publish subscribe, that metadata connector that you can tap into all the events across the board. Yeah, these are really the fundamental building blocks.